Hey guys, it's the Comics Kid 2099 here to do another video. And you may be wondering, why is this guy wearing the same shirt that he was wearing yesterday when he talked about Star Wars? The answer to that is, I am filming multiple videos all in one day. And then I will give you each video once a day. So you may see 3 videos where I'm wearing this same shirt. If I'm not wearing the same shirt over 3 days, it's all on one day for me. So that was a little secret into the life of Comics Kid 2099 and how he does things. And now, on to the review. Today, I will be talking about Jersey Gods, Volume 1, titled, I'd Live and I'd Die for You. This book collects the first 5 issues and is written by Glenn Brunswick and drawn by Dan McDade. I want to first start off by saying that the art in this book is really good. I'm a big fan of artists like Bruce Timm, who did Batman the Animated Series, or Darwyn Cooke, who did DC The New Frontier. And if I had to say that this artist, Mr. McDade, has a style similar to someone, I'd say it's around the ballpark of Darwyn Cooke and Bruce Timm. Here's a little look inside. It's kind of a cross between Bruce Timm and Erik Larsen, who does the Savage Dragon. I think that's probably the best way I can describe the artwork here. And it's really good artwork. I like that kind of art. Very angular, very stylized, very cartoony, colorful. I like all those things. The backstory to this book basically pays homage to Jack Kirby's The Fourth World comics from the 1970s at DC. Those books were Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen, The New Gods, Mr. Miracle, and The Forever People. You could say this book pays homage, but really I think what I need to say is this book flat out steals just about everything from that mythology. You've got this planet, and it's divided in half. There's a good half and a bad half. A lot like New Genesis and Apocalypse. At one point in the 90s, they were combined into one planet that was a good half and a bad half. Then you've got these gods, and they've been at war for millions of years, and in the course of this book, we're not actually told why they're at war. I'll get to that in a minute. And then you've got these 2 leaders of the gods, a lot like Highfather and Darkseid, and they're basically as interesting as Highfather and Darkseid. I'll get to that in a minute too. Despite what you may be thinking, I don't actually have a problem with storytellers stealing a concept from someone else. Let me give you a couple of examples of what I mean. Alan Moore straight up stole the Silver Age Superman in almost every way to tell Supreme. He was working on the title for a little over a year in the late 90s. This series, divided up into 2 trades, was very much like an homage to the Silver Age Superman. I was okay with this because at the time, Superman in the 1990s was nothing like the Silver Age Superman. So in a way, it was like we were getting a brand new character and concept, even though those concepts had already been given to us in the 1960s. Then you have a comic like this. The entire Supreme Power storyline is actually based on the Squadron Supreme storyline from 30-40 years earlier. And the Squadron Supreme idea is that Marvel is doing the Justice League. So Hyperion is based on Superman, Nighthawk is based on Batman. And I don't have a problem with this as long as Marvel does stories that they could not do at DC with the Justice League. For instance, if you just do a story where Nighthawk fights the Jester and then puts him in jail, that's pretty much a standard Batman story that you could have done at DC, and I will have no reason to read that. But if you turn Nighthawk into a black guy who only cares about crimes that are committed against other black people, that's something that you could not do at DC with Batman, and you could say that I'd want to read that to see what you're doing with this character. It's still a very recognizable archetype. You can still recognize that it's based on Batman. It's different enough that I would want to read it. Unfortunately, Jersey Gods doesn't really do anything different with the Kirby concepts at all. This basically feels like it's ripping off the Fourth World without actually doing anything different with the Fourth World. The really sad part is that it would have been really easy to fix that. Jack Kirby's Fourth World, the characters were very limited. They didn't have really any personalities at all, and I was okay with that there. because Kirby was just doing a sci-fi update on the old myths about the gods. Back then, the characters didn't have any personalities. They just went and did things, like killed monsters and stuff. Kirby was just adding spaceships and laser guns to the mix. But when you're taking so much of the groundwork that was already laid down by Jack Kirby in the 1970s, you really need to change something so that I have a reason to want to read this. This would have been very easy in this book. You could have said that the good gods aren't really as good as we thought, and the bad gods aren't really as bad as we thought. Instead of saying that there's extreme good versus extreme evil, you could say that there's just two morally gray armies of gods fighting each other for millennia, and we would find out why over the course of a story. This book doesn't do that. I mentioned in yesterday's video that one of the problems with the Clone Wars was that there was no ideological reason for the conflict to exist. And unfortunately, that's a problem in Jersey Gods Volume 1. We have these two armies of gods, and we have no idea why they're fighting each other. We know that Deltus, the dark side stand-in, his son and wife have died in this war, but we also know that the war has been going on long before either of them died. If Deltus is all about revenge because his son died, well, why was the war being fought before his son died? That's never given to us. In Jack Kirby's Fourth World, I really didn't need a reason for Darkseid and Highfather to be at war, because it was basically a big huge metaphor for good versus evil. Space Satan doesn't need a reason to be evil because he's Satan. Here, if Deltus cares about his son, cares about his wife, and wants to avenge them, then he's very clearly not 100% evil like Darkseid is. So I have to know why he wants to kill all these good gods. In the back of the book, Brunswick and McDade talk a little bit about the concept of how they were coming up with the story, how they came up with the characters, and just the creative process in general. And one of them said that Deltus was like a cross between Doctor Doom and the Joker. That's a very interesting idea, and it's one that I'm not sure I've ever seen before. Kind of this power-hungry tyrant who's also really insane, like the Joker. The problem is that Deltus doesn't come off like that at all in this book. When I'm reading it, all I can see is Darkseid, except a little less evil. Now, if I have to be told that this character acts like a cross between Doctor Doom and the Joker, and I can't see it in action in the book, you definitely have a problem, and you need to come up with a way so that that action can be seen in the book. I want to talk a little bit about something else in the book besides the concept and the backstory. Most of this book is built on a love story between two characters, one of the gods named Barock, and a girl from Earth named Zoe. Now Zoe works for a fashion magazine, I think, and she's always on the hunt for stories about good sales at different stores, and then she gets kidnapped by some terrorists who are wanting to find really good designer pants or something. I guess it's supposed to be an engaging story, but nah. And then Barock, he's off fighting in a civil war somewhere, killing monsters and stuff. Which is fun, but we need some substance in this story if that's going to mean anything at all. What happens here is that the war between the good gods and the bad gods inevitably comes to Earth. And Barock comes to Earth to kill one of Deltus's cronies because he's on Earth and Earth is off limits or something. Here's where I really started to hate this book. Stealing the concept of Jack Kirby's Fourth World, I would have been fine with that if the execution of the rest of this book had been handled better. Barock and Zoe meet each other at the very end of the first issue. And then for 2 or 3 issues, Barock is off in space and Zoe's having her adventure with the designer terrorist people. They both can't stop thinking about each other. We know this doesn't happen very often because Barock was ridiculing his friend for having lots of sex with lots of women. And we clearly know that Zoe doesn't fall in love with gods very often because, well, how often do god aliens come to Earth anyway? The biggest problem I have with this is that these two characters are around each other for about 4 minutes, and then over the span of weeks, they cannot stop thinking about each other. What exactly do these two characters know about each other? All Zoe knows is what he looks like. She doesn't know anything about him. I'm not even sure she knows his first name when he goes back off into space to fight in the Civil War. I'm not really sure why these characters have fallen in love with each other. Now, it could be worse. This book could have given us absolutely nothing about either of these characters, and thankfully it didn't do that. I could tell you quite a few things about Barock. He fights monsters, he fights in wars, he risks his life to save people, and I can tell you some things about Zoe, but neither of these characters know any of those things about each other, and that's a problem. This comic should have given these two characters an introduction in the first issue, and then spent at least 12 to 15 issues letting them get to know each other over the long span of time while Barok fights and kills monsters on Earth or something like that. Instead, these two characters meet each other in the first issue and immediately fall in love without knowing anything about each other. And then, after the plot of this book happens, they start having sex with each other, and then he proposes to her. It's not a spoiler because it's on the cover of the book. Okay, why do they propose to each other? Why should we even care that they've fallen in love and that they're going to get married if we don't know anything about them other than very basic things, and I'm assuming they've only gotten to know each other over the span of a week and a half? It's really badly done. There are two kinds of things that needed to happen here. Number one, the concept needed to be modified in some way. If you're straight up stealing Jack Kirby's Fourth World, you need to change it enough so that you can say that you're doing an homage to his Fourth World while also making some changes. For instance, the Highfather stand-in, maybe he's not quite as noble as you think. And the Darkseid guy, he's not quite as evil as you think. That would have been a good start. Instead, this book doesn't bother with any of that. In fact, if I want to find out anything about Deltas, I have to look in the extra features in the back of the book. And it definitely doesn't show up in the book itself how this character is supposed to appear to us. And two, this story should have taken its time to develop the love story between the two principal characters, and it definitely doesn't do that. These two characters, without knowing anything about each other, fall instantly in love, and after like 2 weeks, he proposes to her. And I'm afraid I just can't care because I don't think these characters have gotten to know each other very well, and I definitely haven't gotten to know them very well. I think the worst part about this is that these two fixes seem like no-brainers to me. Someone should have looked at this and said, yeah, this isn't quite finished material yet. I think this is still a first or second draft. You really need to work on it a little more. Sadly, I'm not going to be getting volume 2 or 3 of this series. I just don't feel like this series earned anything that happens in it, and it definitely didn't earn a second and third volume. Now, I know that this series lasted about 12 issues, and I'm not really sure if the series was canceled after that, or if they planned from the beginning to have only 12 issues. If they were canceled, well, I can understand why. And if they were planning from the beginning to only do 12 issues, well then, they really should have taken their time and paced this thing a lot better. I feel like there's a lot of potential here, and it was almost all wasted. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to recommend that you do not buy or read this book. If you are interested in Jack Kirby homages, then go find another one. Or, better yet, just go find some original Jack Kirby. And keep this in mind. As I was going to St. Ives, I met a man with 7 wives. I'll see you next time.